Thanks, everyone. We're going to start now. I'm Louise Bauer. I'm the lead of Project Groundwater, Innovation Programme Manager at Buckinghamshire Council. And we're going to be taking you through today some insights and impacts from our community engagement approaches from Project Groundwater. Hannah.
Shall I go on to the next slide?
Oh, introduce yourself.
Go for that first. All right, no worries. So I'm Hannah Baker. I work for Groundwork South. So we have the role of leading on the community engagement delivery in Project Groundwater. My role in Groundwork South is an area programme manager, actually based in the west of England, but I also manage a community resilience programme called Communities Prepared. So I help basically support our team working on Project Groundwater, bringing in my own kind of experience and insights from previous community resilience programmes that I've been managing as well. Over to you, Thea, for your intro.
Hi everyone, I'm Thea. I am a Senior Community Engagement Officer on Project Groundwater, and I also work at Groundwork South with Hannah and 3 other colleagues.
Thanks, both. Next slide, please, Hannah. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to Project Groundwater, but just for awareness, we have got a Q&A open. So if anybody's got any questions, please put them in the Q&A function and we can pick them up at some point during this webinar today. So what's Project Groundwater? For those that don't know, it's one of 25 DEFRA funded projects. They are FCRIP projects, so Flood Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, and they're funded by DEFRA and led by the EA. We manage it from Buckinghamshire Council and work with multiple partners. It's part of a 6-year programme and we're in the final year of the project at the moment. And ours is focused on groundwater flooding, which is often termed the forgotten flood risk. Next slide, please. So the rationale for Project Groundwater stemmed from 2 major flood events in Buckinghamshire, looking at groundwater flooding. They were significant events in that the flooding often lasted for multiple months and it caused major devastation to communities. The impacts for groundwater flooding are different to surface water and fluvial, often in that it can last for multiple months and they can cause greater damage to people's homes, which can impact community resilience and mental health impacts for those individuals. Next slide, please. We're operating across a mixed geography in Project Groundwater. So we actually cover 6 lead local flood authority areas as shown on this map. We're covering the Chiltern Hills and Berkshire Downs, and that's typically on the chalk geology. And there are 9 communities at groundwater flood risk that we have been working with on this project. Next slide, please. The vision for Project Groundwater was to forever transform how communities prepare for and respond to groundwater flooding. And you can read the mission on the screen here, but ultimately we were looking to create that step change in terms of how groundwater flooding is approached in industry. Next slide, please. So how have we been doing this? The project operates through several linked work streams that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here. I've mentioned that we work with partners, so we have roughly now 40 delivery partners on Project Groundwater. And we have, for all of these work streams, an overarching communication strategy and an overarching engagement strategy. So each of the work streams has been looking to deliver different interventions for the communities, such as the flood warning system. We have some nature-based solutions. Under resilience, we've got property flood resilience, but all of them have required comms and engagement. And we've worked with various partners, which you can see on the slide here, to do comms and engagement across the board. Next slide, please. So because the project has been seeking to engage and work with communities to increase their resilience, we've actually had people going into those communities. So all 9 pilot communities have had somebody representing Project Groundwater in those communities, engaging with them And that's really been driving the heart of the project. It's been building trust in those communities, but also new relationships. This has taken time, but it also involves a lot of dedication. Next slide. I think I'm handing over to Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Right, fab. So yeah, I'm just going to share with you some highlights from how we've been working in communities, how we've been engaging with communities as well. And this will include things that have been going well, but also things that we've learned along the way and needed to maybe adjust our approach to sort of make it work better. So before I actually start telling you a little bit about that, we just want to get a bit of a flavour of everyone here, like your understanding and your experience of engaging communities and using different community engagement techniques. So you should all be able to see a quick poll. And if you can just mark on here which of the community engagement approaches you've used before, you should be able to select multiple choices. And just to give us a little sense of who's kind of had what experience. I'll just leave it up there for a little bit longer. Thanks all. So from what I'm seeing here from those who have responded, which we've kind of got, what, sort of 25 or so now who have, it sounds like most of you have some community engagement experience, and sort of following on behind that is community consultation. And then what we've got, outreach is closely behind that as well. And then the sort of at the lower end there, far fewer people have had experience of the sort of community participation or community development as well. I think that's great. Thank you. Let's stop sharing that one. And yeah, thank you all for your contributions on that. Hopefully what we'll be able to do now is give you a little bit of a flavour of, as I said, how we've been working and how we've been using some of those approaches as well. So here's so on the screen here you can see a bit more of a description of what we mean by these things, because I recognize that for some people as well it may be quite hard to define what those different approaches are. So when we talk about community outreach, we're talking about reaching out to communities to establish a relationship, potentially to provide them with information or maybe offer some kind of support or service. Community consultation is more about seeking feedback and input from community members. So that could be, for example, through a focus group, it could be a citizens' assembly, it could be a workshop that you run, maybe even just sending out a survey to kind of get those inputs from communities and hopefully then use that to develop the work that you're doing. Community engagement is more around establishing relationships that will have a slightly sort of longer term feel to them. And it should mean that then communities can be more involved in potentially a project or a piece of work that you're doing, or maybe in developing it or in delivering it as well. Community participation goes a bit further than that. It will be actually involving the communities in potentially in decision-making processes. So it could be something like a neighbourhood forum. It could be citizens' assemblies, or it could be an advisory group, something that might last longer and where you get that input from communities over a longer period of time. During both development and delivery of a project. Community development is, again, a much longer term approach. So it's really around looking at how you can empower communities to identify their own needs and address those as well, and to take collective action. And then finally on this list, you've got co-design and co-production. So that is something that's been really key to the work that we've been doing in Project Groundwater, is to really look at how we can work with communities to shape our programme of work, or like it says here, it might be to design services or policies or solutions, rather than just asking for an opinion on it, or rather than an organisation or a project like ours making all those decisions ourselves. So to give you a flavour of how this has worked in Project Groundwater, and Thea's going to tell you a little bit more about a couple of our areas of work in a moment. So just to tell you about sort of some on higher level terms, how we've been working. So we've certainly used outreach. Outreach obviously can be quite an efficient way of working if you've got limited capacity, and it can help raise awareness of the programme. So for us, we've used it to talk to communities at events. We've used it to share social media posts about what we've been up to. We've distributed flyers to offer things like PFR, so property flood resilience surveys, and other kind of initiatives that we're offering during the programme. Consultation, we've used in a number of ways, but this is including getting feedback from communities on new services or initiatives that we've been trialling. So we have developed a new groundwater flood warning service in 7 of the 9 project communities. And we've been able to use like user testing and focus groups to gather feedback on how well that service is working. We're also currently developing natural flood management sort of nature-based solutions projects in some of the communities as well. And again, going through a consultation process with the communities to make sure that they have an opportunity to shape what that looks like and that it works for local community need. We've absolutely been building relationships with the communities, with key stakeholders such as parish councillors and clerks, flood action groups, etc. And that's been that kind of engagement that's been running throughout the programme. And it's meant that we can get their inputs to help shape the project as well, make sure it works for them. And participation and development, again, has been core to what we've been doing. So we're really trying to encourage and empower communities to take the lead. And this has included our new innovation fund that we launched during the project, which Thea's going to tell you about in a moment. And as Louise said, this is all linked in and aligned with our project-wide communication strategy and engagement strategy. But we've also developed individual community engagement plans for each of the communities to help us think through how we best engage them. And towards the end of this session, we'll just come on to community engagement plans briefly to talk through the key steps for developing those. So I'm just going to go on to just talk about what's worked well for us and what we've learned along the way. So you can see here, what we found has worked really well is having activities that are locally tailored based on the context and need. Like I said, we've developed individual community engagement plans, and that's been based on that understanding of what the communities have experienced, who's in the communities, the different assets communities have, and the different challenges they're facing. We've worked cross partnership, and again, that's worked really well. You can bring in different expertise from different sectors to help contribute to projects, to help lead on different projects as well. So really kind of drawing on the different expertise rather than relying on a single organisation to be able to kind of do it all. We've taken a flexible approach, and we've needed to. We have certainly gathered feedback along the way. Thea's going to tell you a bit about another fund that we've launched and how we've kind of taken on board learning to adapt to our approach to that. And we've also established clear feedback loops. So we've made sure that people know if we're launching a service that they have an opportunity to tell us about how well that's working for them or not. And then taken that on board and done something about it and told them that we've done something about it as well. We've invested time in building local relationships, as Louise already mentioned. And we've tried to be very clear and consistent with our communication, which helps to sort of manage expectations from those that we're working with. We've also, as I touched on just briefly before, allowed space in what we're doing for co-design and co-production. When Groundworks South joined Project Groundwater back in October 2022, we didn't have all the answers. It wasn't like we were given a brief that said, you will deliver X, Y, Z, and it will go exactly like this. It was much more about you'll build relationships with communities and you'll shape the project together. And it could include these things, but will also depend on what other work streams are doing, what the communities need, etc. And so that's always been built into the project from the off. And yeah, finally giving communities tools to lead their own projects, as I mentioned with the Innovation Fund. What have we learnt? Well, we need to take the time to build trust, but also it really does require consistent messaging and expectation management. It's a large programme, Project Groundwater, as are the other FCRIP programmes. But we still can't do everything. So we do need to be really clear with communities what we can actually do, what's within the scope of the programme and what's not, and also which areas geographically are within the scope of the programme and which are not as well. We know that community members are very busy and there's a lot of competing priorities for people as well. A lot of people have worries about the cost of living and whether they can afford to heat their homes or put food on the table. So we need to make things easier for people and not ask too much as well. We know as well that it's quite hard to keep momentum going if flooding doesn't feel like a priority issue. If it doesn't happen very often, it's very hard sometimes to land salient messages saying, well, you do need to worry about this risk, when they say, well, I've lived here for 10 years and I've never flooded. So sometimes we need to diversify activities to kind of get people engaged in different ways. If flooding's not the in, it might be something else. It might be that a community group could also look at other challenges they might be facing, like storms or heat or snow in the winter, and then you bring in flooding messages around that too. Sufficient local funding is really important, and local capacity as well. And related to that, community leads are hugely important, as I'm sure many of you will know, but they do really need good support behind them as well. You can't just have one lead community member who's doing it all, because it's just not sustainable. The timing of activities we found, if we've run an event that's in the sort of summer months, even though flooding can happen at any time of year, it probably lands less well than in the winter, when everyone's attention is more turning to flooding. And yeah, we know that it's more effective to actually engage with communities rather than just go down the route of bulk outreach activities. But we've had to do some of it. We've sent flyers out to thousands of people, but often the response rates will be relatively low compared to real quality engagement with a smaller number of people. We also know that approaches need to be accessible and inclusive and feel relevant for people. And we recognise that the part of the country that Project Groundwater is running is probably less diverse than other parts of the country as well. But, you know, obviously engagement often will need to be done in different languages, with resources available in different languages, or different types of print to enable people to read it in different ways. So that needs to be built into. And then finally on here, there is, as probably many of you know, no one size fits all approach, but we've certainly found that different size communities, different types of communities need different approaches. We've got small rural villages and we've got large towns in this project, and they need very different approaches. And also the kinds of stakeholders that we engage, and by no means the same. We've got community members, we've got council members within Buckinghamshire Council, we've got businesses and everything in between. And so you can't just have one approach to engagement that works for everyone. I'll pause there and hand over to Thea, who's going to tell you a little bit about two of the initiatives that we've been working on through the project and how they've been working. Over to you, Thea.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll just sort of reintroduce myself a bit first. So I'm Thea. I work as a Senior Community Engagement Officer on Project Groundwater. I'm part of a team of 3 Senior Community Engagement Officers, each of us with responsibility for supporting a number of the project's communities under the guidance of a project manager at Groundwork. Together, we provide sort of on-the-ground, face-to-face engagement across all 9 communities, working closely with the residents, flood groups, local stakeholders, to build relationships and support communities to be more resilient to groundwater flooding. As Hannah mentioned, I'd like to sort of share some reflections on how we've empowered communities, some of the lessons we've learned, and how different approaches have been received by communities. And I'd like to talk about our 2 sort of main funding schemes. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the first was our seed funding, which provided each of our 9 communities with up to £2,000 to support sort of local flood groups or other community flood resilience activities. To start with, we offered this money as a pot with some suggested and approved items that could be used by communities to sort of support or help them with the activities that they've got going on. And one of the interesting things that we learned with this was that simply offering communities a pot of money wasn't always enough to encourage uptake, and we actually received very little uptake of these funds at this point. And I think sort of people often struggle to decide or know what to use the money for, or what would be best for their community. So we adapted our approach, and rather than saying, here's £2,000, what would you like to do with it? We developed practical flood kits that communities could use that funding for. And I have to say the difference in uptake was quite remarkable. I think having something tangible made the funding much more accessible and easy. They could get something sort of really useful that they don't have to think about too much, which is what you want when you're perhaps a volunteer who works full time, or, as Hannah said, has competing priorities, or perhaps is having to deal with an active flooding situation. And there isn't always capacity for community members to decide or put together things like this. So we wanted to make it easy and practical. And uptake increased significantly. The flood kits have proved so popular that 13 kits have now been ordered, with one of the communities ordering a total of 6 kits to support 6 different villages in their area, which is just fantastic and exactly what we wanted to see. What's particularly exciting as well is that the flood kit sort of became more than just a collection of equipment. In one area, the discussions around the flood kits actually helped instigate wider discussions between multiple different community groups, which has now led to the reformation of a sort of retired flood group. And they're now sort of reinvigorated and have started working on a new flood plan for the town, which is fantastic. So that's our seed funding, and now I'll go on to talk about the Innovation Fund now. Thank you, Hannah. So yeah, the second sort of funding stream was our Innovation Fund. So it's quite a bit bigger. We made £100,000 available across 9 communities, all 9 of us, inviting them to submit proposals for projects that would increase flood resilience. And I'm pleased to say that all of the communities that applied were successful. And one of the most encouraging outcomes, I think, has been seeing communities take real ownership of these projects. One example is the Bury Pond Flood Action Group. The innovation funding played a key role in helping local residents that live sort of close to the pond establish themselves as a formal flood group. It supported the group's early development and gave the residents the confidence and resources to build on work that they were actually already doing during flood events. And the work that they do impacts sort of flooding. It prevents quite significant flooding in the area that they're working in. What had sort of often been reactive, informal efforts have now become more organised, and they have a proactive programme of activities, which also helps the group establish itself as an active and trusted part of the community. Perhaps even more encouraging has been seeing how they've maintained momentum. As we all know, keeping volunteer groups active between flood events can be quite challenging. But this group, rather than focusing sort of solely on flooding, they've diversified activities. So they organise work days, they collaborate with other volunteer groups and corporate volunteers to help deliver practical improvements to the environment around the pond that they are working on. And by doing this, they've then also sort of created an even wider sense of ownership in the area. And importantly, having successfully delivered the main sort of elements of their project, the group approached us to explore further funding opportunities to expand their work and deliver even greater benefits for the area. And we were pleased to support this. And this is exactly the kind of sort of legacy that we're aiming for, and not communities that are sort of dependent on support, but communities that are empowered and sort of confident to continue driving change themselves. And another great example is the South Oxford Flood Action Group. Unlike Bury Pond, the South Oxford Flood Action Group was already an established flood group when the Innovation Fund became available. They had identified sort of several priorities and had begun developing a flood action plan. The Innovation Fund sort of gave them the opportunity to turn those ideas into action and take ownership of a project that addressed local needs that they'd identified. Using the funding, the group has developed and is piloting a community-led early warning system, including the monitoring of groundwater levels. And this has involved sort of actually installing their own shallow borehole alongside a series of gauge boards at key locations in their area. What's particularly impressive about how the group about this is how the group have built on existing strengths. So they've recruited local volunteers to help with monitoring and recording groundwater flood levels. Data from their borehole and gauge boards will be shared through their website. And when necessary, warnings and information will be communicated through their already sort of well-established communication networks, which is another really impressive aspect with this group, is the strength of the communication networks that they've created, sort of through a combination of street champions, an active sort of local Facebook group, the links with schools, businesses, vulnerable residents. South Oxford Flood Action Group has created and maintained excellent channels for sharing information and advice. And this means, of course, that when flooding is a threat, they're very well placed to quickly communicate any warnings and support that wider community. For me, the group is a great example of how funding can enable communities not just to respond to flooding, but to lead the development of locally driven solutions. The group understands the challenges and nuances in their area better than anyone, and the funding has given them the opportunity to turn that in-depth knowledge and existing networks into practical action that will benefit the whole community. So together, both of these groups show that communities can be at very different stages of their journey and have different needs and ambitions. But with the right support and resources, they can take ownership, build confidence, and create lasting, impactful, community-led resilience. Next slide, please, Hannah. So I'll just finish on some key reflections. Engagement is most effective when built around people, not programs. As I mentioned, funding alone doesn't always inspire communities. Practical solutions or support and clear opportunities do. Communities themselves often already have the passion and commitment. Sometimes what they need is simply the support, confidence, and resources to turn that energy into something bigger. And ultimately, resilience isn't something we deliver to communities, something we build with them. And also keep an eye out for the sort of videos that we've put together for our Innovation Fund projects. They'll be coming out fairly soon. So please keep an eye out for them on the website. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Thea. We have got an opportunity now for Q&A. So anything that you've heard that you want to ask us a question about, the Q&A function is open and we can take questions that way. If you can't access the Q&A, then you can put them into the chat, but I have seen there is a question in the Q&A at the moment, so I'll read the question out. If anyone wants to go to the Q&A and add into it at this point, we're going to take questions here before we move into our next part of the workshop. So the first question is, if you were starting your action groups again today, what would you do differently in the first 6 to 12 months? And what support, both institutional, technical, or financial, would you say is essential for others trying to replicate this approach? And I think, Hannah, that would be great if you could start with that one.
Yeah, no problem. So I think one of the things that I think the team have found quite challenging is making sure that a new flood action group doesn't rely too heavily or is not too dependent on the project team, knowing that we're not here forever. So Project Groundwater closes next March. And so I think something that we would maybe do a bit differently is make sure that that's really built in from the start. One, managing the expectations, and two, ensuring that the group have the right kind of tools and knowledge and understanding to be able to be more kind of independent and self-sufficient from early on, because if you go in at the beginning with too much of kind of hand-holding approach, then that kind of sets that expectation from the start that that's the way it will continue. So I think we probably would build that in a bit earlier. The other thing, I guess, in relation to the support that you were asking about, Declan, as well, is I think making sure what we can do is helping the communities to kind of have a good understanding of like the risks that they've got, their capabilities, helping build those capabilities, like offering training and workshops that mean the members of the flood action group have the skills that they might need to support their community's resilience, and helping make connections where we as a project have them but the community might not. So yeah, those connections can be really valuable to know who you might need to speak to if there is a flood, or to know who you might need to speak to help you prepare for that scenario and to help with the recovery as well. Financially as well, I think, you know, being able to provide a seed fund and an innovation fund through this project is fantastic, but I recognise as well that's not kind of normal and won't be the case everywhere. So I think something that flood action groups can find really beneficial is advice around funding opportunities and the kind of governance structures that a group might need to think about to tap into different funding opportunities too. So for me, those are some of the key things.
Thanks, Hannah. Thea, would you like to add anything to that?
All the things I was going to mention, Hannah has wonderfully mentioned. So I don't actually have anything to add to that yet. Thank you.
No, that's great. I think just to add to this from the technical perspective, our project has been focused on groundwater flood risk, and across the 9 communities, there have been incidents that aren't just groundwater flood focused. So all of the communities experience some form of duality in flooding, whether that be groundwater, surface water, fluvial interventions. And so going back to kind of the first 6 to 12 months, I think it's really important in all of the communities that you kind of give them some basic understanding of flood risk, because we're so specific on groundwater flooding that some of the communities, and particularly some of the feedback we've had, has been around other types of flood risk. So what are we as a project going to do about surface water flooding, for example? And with our focus being on groundwater flood risk and it being an innovation project, we haven't had the same mechanisms as a standard flood alleviation scheme approach that they might normally encounter in their communities. So we have, in terms of that sort of feedback, had to take on board that people are at different points in their knowledge, and so they need to kind of be brought on board with our project and the journey from their understanding. So we've found at a different point in their understanding of flood risk, but particularly groundwater flood risk. So hopefully, Declan, that's answered your question. I'm not sure if you want to come off mute in case we haven't, but if not, there is another question in the chat, so I'll just pause a moment. Okay, I'm going to go with that, so yes. The second question in the Q&A is from Emma. I really like the focus on communicating value rather than the service, like the benefit of funding rather than the funding itself. This seems to be a common theme in community emergency planning works. Do you have any other examples of where this has influenced your comms? I'll go to Hannah first.
Good question, Emma. I think it's probably just around the sort of key messaging that we use around trying to get the kind of why point across. I think it goes back to what I said before for some communities, that kind of the flooding messaging doesn't seem very salient if you haven't flooded for a very long time. So it's making sure, I think, like you were saying, Louise, that sort of understanding of risk is really clear. And then also the understanding around like we're not in a situation now in this country where we can rely on others to support us if our community is going through a challenging time. Like we can't always expect that, you know, blue light responders will just be able to turn up, because they're operating with extremely kind of stretched resources as well. And in some cases for communities, they're really, really hard to get to as well. And so I think it's that element of kind of, it's difficult messages to relay to communities, but being able to get across the why bit And then also, and here's what you can do about it. Here's a kind of simple actions that you can take. It doesn't always have to be about throwing a lot of money at something or a really, really big project. It can be, what can I do in my home to help my home or my own family be more prepared, and what can I do in my community to help my community be more prepared. So yeah, I think if you can get those why messages across, it kind of it's that benefit of doing something rather than just like you just have to you've got to do it, you know, and like sort of doom and gloom sort of messaging, which isn't really going to help do much more than instill panic.
Thanks, Anna. Thea, do you have anything else you want to add to that one?
I suppose just sort of that this project is trying to work with communities in a innovative way, and sort of building from the community needs up definitely helps us do that in a way that benefits them in the best way possible. And that then also obviously influences how we communicate wider. And yeah, I think it's a really beneficial way of working.
Thanks, Thea. Emma, we do have our website linked later at the end of this workshop, and there are some other examples on there of communicating in the communities, the different types of projects that we've been doing. I think in terms of communicating value rather than the service, where we've worked in our communities from kind of a nature-based solutions focus or a property flood resilience focus, we have also had to tailor our approach so that people understand the value of trying something new. So as Thea mentioned, it is an innovation project. We are trying new things in the communities, and sometimes people expect us to do something in a business as usual way. And we've had to overcome those challenges where people have seen previously different interventions take place through the Environment Agency or various other risk management authorities and expect that we're following a similar process. So we haven't been following a similar process, and communicating that value has been really important to overcome some of the challenges that we've faced, particularly in some of our other work streams. So we can certainly, if you have a look on the website, answer any other questions that are specific to those projects afterwards. And I've also linked further on our email address so that you can contact the project. That is all of the questions in the Q&A. So I think we can move on to the next section. If anyone does want to ask any more questions, we can keep the Q&A open, but we are mindful of time.
Thank you, Louise. So we're just gonna we've got 20 minutes left of the session. We're going to spend about 10 minutes just doing a bit more of a workshop focus rather than you just all listening to us. So what we'd really love to do is to go into breakout rooms, and the SciWem team behind the scenes are going to get those set up in a moment. Each of me and Thea and Louise will be in one room each, so you'll be able to you'll have a facilitator in there. But these are what we'd like to talk about is this. So based on what you've heard from us and reflecting on your own work as well, we'd love to hear from you around what community engagement challenges you might be currently facing, what engagement approaches you've tried before and how well they've worked, and is there anything you've heard today that's helped maybe spark a new idea or opportunity for your own work. Now, we haven't got loads of time. We'll have 10 minutes sort of max in the room, so it may be that not everyone gets a chance to speak, but do use the chat function if you'd like to as well. And when you're contributing in the breakout rooms, feel free to just introduce yourself in your responses, in what your role is or who you work for, because that just helps give some context to what you're sharing as well. The breakout rooms are not being recorded as well, so feel free to speak freely as much as you feel able to. I think that's enough in terms of sort of introducing the room. So yeah, if we let the SciWem team do the magic in the background, thank you, Liv, and I will also try and put these questions into the chat, so you'll see them hopefully when you're in the breakout room as well, but if not, each of us have got a copy of them too. Cool. Maybe Liv, if we can reconvene just after 10 to, that would be great. So maybe a 9 minutes or 8 minutes breakout room. Thank you. Fab, thank you. Thank you all. I hope you find those conversations useful. I think, as is probably always the way with these things, I know some people have had to leave during weren't able to join the breakout rooms and have left during the session. But we've got 6 minutes left. Just very quickly, Thea or Louise, did you want to share any real kind of high-level reflections from the conversation you had? Is there anything in particular that struck you that's worth sharing back into the group now?
Yeah, I'll go quickly. So we had a couple of examples. One was around where in communities you often have one or two individuals who kind of champion things, and then that resilience can leave if the individuals decide they're moving out of that community, or that they just don't want to be the lead of that anymore. And then we also had a nice example where one of the issues was getting people involved in flood action groups after events can be challenging, but you then get some momentum and lose engagement over time. But then you can, with some interventions, have really good successes. So one of the examples was around using Hello Lamppost system to give people access to somebody to speak to, a link to a website, and having that location where they can go in the event of a flood, and actually having that known system in place in a community has been really beneficial to one of the people in my breakout room.
Fab, that's helpful. Thank you, Louise. Sounds like a good conversation. Thea, anything in particular from yours you wanted to share?
Sure, we had some discussions sort of around challenges like things like survey overload. So in projects when perhaps there's a few things going on at the same time and they need surveys or questionnaires, that having too many of those at once can restrict engagement. So sort of discuss that perhaps spreading those things out or doing other methods of engagement to get that sort of information that you need is a great way to sort of improve that level of engagement. And we also spoke about sort of approaching funding if you have specific deliverables. For us on Project Groundwater, I sort of was talking about the Innovation Fund and how we were quite lucky that the communities were able to sort of shape it how they needed to for their area, but other organisations or funding pots aren't able to be that flexible. So it was sort of discussed that sort of keeping it transparent and being honest about what you can provide, and sort of guiding them to, I suppose, an area of work that's beneficial for both sides.
Thank you, Thea. And just very quickly, because I know we're sort of running out of time, in our group we talked about for some communities or community members feeling like flooding's not affecting them. Fiona was sharing that it can be beneficial to talk about indirect as well as direct impacts of flooding. So that age-old kind of, but I live on a hill, it doesn't affect me, but actually it may well affect where you go shopping or the school is or the doctors. And that does therefore have an indirect effect on your life. So it's like changing the messaging there. We also talked about kind of sometimes an initial interest in a sort of opportunity doesn't translate into kind of it actually being like a priority. So we're talking about parish councils. So that importance of building trusts and sometimes actually going back to kind of a really sort of basic grassroots approach, keeping the messaging really simple and practical can help get people engaged. And then we were also just talking about the challenges of kind of valuing engagement. So it's not all about numbers, but being able to demonstrate that what we're doing is valuable. And again, talking about maybe changing the story. Sometimes it's around a narrative and a story rather than just trying to give cold, hard numbers. So thank you all. Very briefly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, I'm just going to share my screen one last time. And if we have time, we will come back to the Q&A where there was another question. Just on this, though, in the end, when we were planning for our session, we had hoped to be able to spend longer on this, but actually we realised we had lots of other things we wanted to cover. So what we wanted to do was just to kind of segue into this for those that are kind of less familiar with developing a community engagement plan. And as I said, we've had one for each of the communities in Project Groundwater, and it's something that we have kept under review during the programme, building on what we've learned as we go. But I just wanted to set out here the kind of key steps that you can take, and these slides will be shared so you can look at this in your own time, to really kind of go through the process of developing a community engagement plan. If you haven't done one already, or if you've got one, it's worth looking back at these steps and thinking, am I doing these things? And I think the key thing to take away, rather than me going through each of these, because you can read it yourself, is that it should be seen as a live document that you do review, reflect on, and adapt as you go. So it's never something that you create and then stick on a shelf and think, well, I've done that job now, because that's not really how it works in life. So we're really happy as well to explore offline with any of you that are interested in having a conversation about this. We can share some of our learning from it as well. So yeah, come contact us. And on that note, contact us. I'll come back to that. Contact us on these details here. The website, I think, was already shared in the chat just before, and our email address is there. And our little challenge for you is have a think about what you could do as a result of what you've heard today. You don't need to tell us, but make a little pledge to yourself of like, okay, I've learned, I'm going to take this away from this session. I'm going to go away and make a plan, or I'm going to go away and think about how I engage with communities. Is there anything you could do differently that would help you improve the effectiveness of your engagement? And with that, I'll just give Louise, as the overall project lead, an opportunity to say any closing remarks before we wrap up, and we're at 1 o'clock.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I've just responded in the chat to the last question, but if anybody has got more questions, then please do reach out to us on the hello@projectgroundwater.co.uk email address. It's been really good to hear some examples from you as well, and not just all be a one-way direction of information. We do have till March left on the project, but we are looking to obviously work closely with our communities over the last few months to make sure that we hand over to them in a way that's sustainable for them to continue to support themselves, but also so that the legacy of the project continues in some format. So keep an eye on our social media pages too. We have a Project Groundwater page on LinkedIn and other mechanisms for social media. So if you search Project Groundwater, you'll find us that way. But thank you very much. And thank you to Hannah and Thea for joining me and doing the workshop today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Great to see you all. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.